On today's show, why J.D. Vance is the most unpopular running mate in American history. For example, J.D. Vance responded to the tragic events in Georgia this week by telling voters, quote, "School shootings are a fact of life." He then said the answer isn't fewer guns, it's more guns. Meanwhile, the father, the 14-year-old Georgia high school shooter who killed 2 students and 2 teachers, has been arrested, charged with involuntary manslaughter for allowing his child to possess a weapon. This is part of a new trend in some states where parents are being held criminally responsible when their child goes on a shooting spree. Blame everyone and everything except the guns. While Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene called for more prayer after the shooting, Georgia Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock said, "While the entire community is in my prayers, we can't pray only with our lips. We must pray by taking action." Senator Raphael Warnock is also a reverend. On today's show, how J.D. Vance is destroying Donald Trump's chances of ever returning to the White House and why Trump is secretly, quietly fine with that, because now he'll have somebody to blame. Plus, Donald Trump enters a plea of not guilty in his Washington, D.C. election interference trial. More on that. Hunter Biden pleads guilty in a federal courtroom where he is charged with cheating the government out of $1.4 million in unpaid taxes. It was a surprise decision, but Hunter explained he wanted to spare his family the emotional pain of yet another trial. Hunter could face as many as 17 years in prison, but that's highly unlikely. Donald Trump's youngest son, Barron, will be attending New York University starting this fall. As Kamala Harris and Coach Walsh fish for votes in Pennsylvania on Thursday, the White House signaled President Biden will block a Japanese company from purchasing U.S. steel, a merger Pennsylvania steel workers oppose. On news of Biden blocking the merger, shares of U.S. Steel plunged 17%. Meanwhile, shares of Trump Media, the company behind Trump's social media platform, have plunged 70% since going public back in March. Trump's stake in the company, once valued at $6 billion, is now said to be less than $2 billion, and even lower than that if he should ever try to unload it. If he ever tries to sell the stock, which he can do next month, his act of selling will make the stock plunge even further. The August job report is out later today. We're expecting unemployment numbers to tick up slightly, signaling just enough slowing in the economy for a much anticipated rate cut from the Federal Reserve later in the month. The stock market was down slightly on Thursday after reports that the pace of hiring in the private sector seems to be slowing. Donald Trump delivered what his campaign called a major speech on his economic policy. It was delivered before a group of Manhattan investors where he said, and I'm not making this up, Donald Trump, the brilliant businessman, once again said imposing tariffs on foreign imports will create a pool of money in the Treasury that can pay for things like child care. He's an idiot. Trump said that because he has no grasp of economics, he doesn't understand, nor do his voters, that tariffs make imports more expensive. So Americans have no choice but to buy domestic versions of a product instead of the foreign one. While yes, a tariff is a tax paid by American consumers, not the Chinese, it brings little into the Treasury because consumers choose cheaper domestic iterations of the same product. He's a moron. For example, Joe Biden just imposed tariffs on electric cars from China, doubling the price. He doubled the price of electric cars from China. Now that means Americans will just stop buying electric cars from China. It doesn't mean billions of dollars will now end up flowing into our nation's treasury. If anything, tariffs are a tax on Americans because the consumers have to pay the cost of the tariff, not China, which Donald Trump keeps saying. He says, I collected billions from China. No, you collected from consumers who had to pay the tariff. So yes, some money does end up in the Treasury because of a tariff, but it's not China who's paying it. It's money American consumers have to pay if they go ahead and purchase any Chinese goods with these tariffs. Like I said, Trump and his voters do not understand how tariffs work. It's hard to believe he's gone bankrupt 6 times. Also on today's show, Liz Cheney endorses Kamala Harris. Came a lot earlier than I thought it would. It was a bit of a surprise. The federal government runs out of money in 3 weeks. The VA runs out of money in 2 weeks, and Congress is still on vacation. This is the mop-up for September 6. Yes, September 6, 2024. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. Please, you know the drill. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. And of course, if you want to help me out, the best way is by sharing the link to this specific episode with your friends, either by text, email, social media, or in one of those disgusting chat rooms you frequent late at night in the dark. Sharing this is the best way to help me. You're all I've got. I'm not part of some podcasting network. I'm not famous. It's a miracle that I have any audience at all. And that miracle is you, the listeners who get the word out. Thank you for doing that. The debate between Kamala Harris and convicted felon Donald Trump is September 10th. I'm hosting another watch party on Zoom. It will be exactly like the last debate watch party, only this time our side will win. We had a great time at the last debate watch party, even though it was depressing. It was, but it's important to be around other people. So anyway, here's how it works. Doors open at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. We'll talk briefly. We'll do some sound checks. Then the debate starts at 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll watch it together on Zoom. We'll make jokes in the chat room. And then after the debate, I will open the floor for conversation like I did last time as I record an episode of my audio podcast. This is a private get-together. I'm not doing this on YouTube. I'm doing this on Zoom. It's an opportunity to hang out with my listeners the way we used to. We'll watch the debate, and then I'll open the floor for discussion. I need some of you to speak up and ask questions in the Q&A. I'm not having any guests. It's just me talking to the listeners, and you will be anonymous. Your cameras will not be on. You'll only see me. Even if you decide to talk, we will only hear your voice. So my listeners can attend the watch party the way they listen to the show, naked. I don't want to see you. It's much better this way. I find people open up more when it's just their voice or when they're in a chat room. I tried it the other way where we get to see nobody. It's better if you can't be seen. If you express yourself verbally or in the chat room, it's more fun. Anyway, if you would like to attend, go to shopdavidfeldman.com for the link, or go to my official website, davidfeldmanshow.com, or there's a link in the description of this episode. Just click on it to register. I am charging $3. I'm charging $3 for several reasons. We accept all major credit cards. You'll see PayPal. You'll see PayPal, and that means we accept all major credit cards. You don't have to be signed up with PayPal. PayPal processes credit cards for me, so you don't have to be a PayPal person. You just need a credit card. So I wanted to charge $2.50 like the last time, but Zoom will not allow that now. You have to charge either $2 or $3. I can't charge $2.50. for some reason, they won't allow me to put 50 cents in there. So I gave myself a greedflation raise. I'm charging $3. I'm charging for these events to cover some of the costs and to keep a-holes, D-bags out, except me. In the past, I used to make these things free. But what happened is MAGA morons and other assorted creeps would come into the room, bother everyone, do and say horrible things. I don't want it. So charging $3 keeps the riffraff out. I know some of you don't have that kind of money. I set the room up right before the show started. I'll see if we can accommodate people who can't pay, but I have to figure that out. Last time some of you couldn't get in. That won't happen this time. Now back to J.D. Vance, who is now suffering with the lowest approval rating of any vice presidential candidate in modern American history. And this is a serious, serious problem, not just for Donald Trump, but for the entire Republican Party. Here is why. We are a democratic republic. We are a democratic republic. And we're reliant on presidents and members of Congress to make important decisions for us. Elections, in the end, come down to trust. I know my listeners and I and my friends like to talk about issues, but when you're asking how many, 150, 170, 200 million Americans to vote, it comes down to trust. Most issues, like the budget, defense spending, Ukraine, Gaza, climate disaster, abortion, income inequality, all this stuff requires hours of study to form an opinion. It's why there are debates and hearings in the well of the Senate, in the House of Representatives. There are congressional hearings, Senate hearings. It requires immense study, which ordinary Americans, including me, have little time for. Which is why when we cast our ballots, it's less about issues and more about trust. We ask ourselves, can I depend on this candidate to represent me? Will this candidate keep their promises made to me? Will this candidate look out for me? And all of this comes down to likability, which manifests itself in something called favorability ratings, which is bad news for J.D. Vance because he is despised. Voters, Americans loathe this man because the feeling is mutual. We all get a sense of how much he hates us. He's filled with hatred. Now, every day, 365 days a year. Yes, there are 365 days in a year. Polling operations take the temperature of ordinary Americans, and they ask how they view the candidates and other politicians. Do you view them favorably or unfavorably? So this, in trying to predict elections, is one of the most important indices. There's voter enthusiasm and then likability. These are the big currents that shape our polls. Now, America is a divided nation. And a 50% unfavorability rating or a 50% favorability rating is considered pretty damn good. You're winning if you can get half this country to like you. What you don't want to be is underwater. And J.D. Vance is drowning. One of the chief reasons Joe Biden was forced to step aside is because his favorability rating is what they call underwater. What does underwater mean? It means more Americans dislike Joe Biden than like him. For example, this is where it stands with Joe Biden this morning, and I don't understand it. People don't like Joe Biden, the most consequential president of my lifetime. Bernie Sanders says the most progressive president since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This is where it stands with the American people. These are the averages of the likability polls. 39.8% of Americans like Joe Biden, while 55% dislike him. And that means he's 15 points, 15.2%? Yeah, let's just say 15 points, 15% underwater. Okay, that's a disaster. In other words, more people dislike him than like him. Do the math. 55% dislike him, 39.8% like him. You subtract 55% from 39.8, and what is that? 15.2% underwater. Okay? I think I did the math properly. You have to keep in mind, when it comes to politics in America, familiarity breeds contempt. That's why so many people tell me to do fewer shows. The more Americans get to know someone, the less they like that person. For example, Donald Trump, coming up on 10 years with this homunculus, he is also underwater, but not as badly as Joe Biden. Like I said, Biden's at 15.2% underwater, which is horrible. Trump is underwater at 12%. So Trump is doing a little bit better than Joe Biden. In other words, right now, more Americans like Trump. More Americans trust Trump than they do Joe Biden. Did I ever mention that we live in a really stupid country? This is an incredibly stupid country. More Americans trust Donald Trump than they do Joe Biden. Luckily, Donald Trump isn't running against Joe Biden. He's running against Kamala Harris, who, because Americans know very little about her, she has a much higher favorability rating than both Biden and Donald Trump. She's split right down the middle. The same exact number of Americans who dislike Kamala Harris, that number is exactly the same as the number of people who like her, who trust her. But here's where it gets really interesting, and it's a major problem for Donald Trump and the Republican Party, okay? Back on July 3rd, Harris was severely underwater. It was looking like she was going to be the nominee and Joe Biden was going to step aside. She was 18% underwater on July 3rd. Kamala Harris, and I talked about this when this was going on, she was hated just as much as Joe Biden. They were tied July 3rd, equally despised. So, back looking at the polls, I said replacing Joe Biden with Kamala Harris won't solve the problem. They're both equally despised. It's why, if you remember, I was pushing for Biden to stay on the ticket and then maybe after he's reelected, step aside. Something I didn't expect, something a lot of people didn't expect is happening. I think Michelle Obama calls it magic. I have to admit, George Clooney and those big Hollywood donors saw what I didn't. The more voters get to know Kamala Harris, the more they like her. This is an anomaly. This never happens in American politics. In 2 months, Kamala Harris's favorability rating shot up close to 18 percentage points. This never happens, okay? Now, I just want to talk about methodology and how I arrive at my opinions and why I said Joe Biden, I was wrong. But let me just tell you about polls, because some of you say, why do you read polls? Good polls tell us everything. Good polls provide a snapshot of where this country is at the moment. A lot of people foolishly think polls predict the winner on November 5th. No, that's not the purpose of polls. Polls tell us where we are right now and how to move surrogates, money, and candidates around the electoral map. Polls change because campaigns respond to the polls, right? Kamala Harris just got a big bump in Georgia. Why? Because she saw that it was tied, so she and Coach Walz went down there this week, and now she's creeping up. Polls are very important, especially likability. So, the polls weren't wrong. When I said Kamala Harris was as equally despised as Joe Biden on July 3rd, I was correct, and she was. This is what you have to understand about polls. Kamala Harris was equally despised as Joe Biden because the American people didn't really know her. And what little they saw of her, they didn't like. The polls were accurate back then. But as she introduced herself to the American people, her numbers, her favorability ratings shot through the roof. Unlike anything I ever saw, so I give people credit. The rich Hollywood donors, they saw it. They got up close and personal, and they know. They said once America gets to see Kamala Harris, they're going to fall in love with her. It's kind of like me and her husband, Doug Emhoff. I didn't like him. I didn't know anything about the guy other than he was a Los Angeles corporate attorney, and you know what I think of corporate attorneys, especially the ones in Los Angeles. And in case you don't know what I think of them, they're all scumbags. Well, some of them are douchebags. But when Doug Emhoff spoke at the convention, and I got to know him, I found myself saying, I like this guy. I'm going to vote for him for first husband. I'm going to vote for him for first husband. Can we do that? Anyway, so, and again, I'm not making excuses. I got it wrong about Joe Biden staying on the ticket. I got it wrong. I'm just telling you my methodology and what polls were telling me, and those polls were correct. But at the time, okay. So Coach Walz poses a very serious problem for Donald Trump and the GOP. It's why they're attacking him mercilessly. Later on today's program, I have news on their shameless attempts to drag Coach Walz through what I call synthetic mud. They're making crap up. They have to, because he's beloved. Walz has a net positive favorability of nearly 5%. Phenomenal, okay? He's more popular than Kamala Harris. Now, theoretically, his favorability rating is supposed to go down the more Americans get to know who he is, but the problem for Trump is the more Americans get to know who Coach Walz is, the more stubborn his likability numbers remain. There's something about Coach Walz that people like. I think it could have something to do with the fact that he's perfect. He is a perfect human being. He came out of nowhere and is everything that is good and decent about America. Good on Kamala Harris for choosing him. the single most important decision a presidential candidate makes is their running mate. John McCain was almost a fairly decent candidate. Then he picked Sarah Palin as his number two. Several high-level campaign staffers working for McCain, especially the ones charged with briefing Sarah Palin before her debate with Joe Biden, several of them realized just how stupid Sarah Palin is, and they secretly voted for Barack Obama in 2008. Because it's not just that Sarah Palin is stupid. There's something seriously wrong with Sarah Palin. And there was something seriously wrong with John McCain for picking her. It was reckless and irresponsible, and it revealed a serious lack of judgment. And by the way, do you know who recommended Sarah Palin? Our old friend, the odious Bill Kristol, the same piece of human excrement who killed Hillary Care back in 1993. We almost had Hillary Care back in 1993, but it was Bill Kristol who was working for Bob Dole, who said, if you pass Hillary Care, the Democrats will have a permanent majority. They love stuff. He said they love stuff like Medicare and Social Security. You pass Hillary Care, Republican Party is through. So how many millions died for political expediency recommended by this piece of bat guano, Bill Kristol? He also banged the war drum in Iraq. He kind of invented, with PNAC, he invented the invasion of Iraq. And Bill Kristol recommended Sarah Palin. He met with her when he was on a cruise that docked in Anchorage, Alaska, and he found her to be presidential material. That would be never Trumper Bill Kristol. Bill Kristol, who has no problem being asked to appear on MSNBC, ABC News, CNN. To this day, our mainstream media is constantly asking this dolt to opine. They ask him for his opinions on everything except the 1 million Iraqi civilians whose blood is on this monster's hands. And I mean that. There was no bigger champion of our illegal invasion of Iraq than this turd, Bill Kristol. And that now brings us to Donald Trump's running mate, speaking of turds, J.D. Vance. And whose idea was J.D. Vance? Well, it wasn't Bill Kristol's. It was Don Jr.'s idea and Tucker Carlson's. Need I say more? The very thing they loved about J.D. Vance, his combative style, his mean-spiritedness, it is the very thing Americans find so detestable about J.D. Vance, as well as Don Jr. and Tucker Carlson. They saw themselves in J.D. Vance and went to Donald Trump and said, you got to pick this guy. He's fantastic. J.D. Vance has only been serving in the Senate for fewer than 2 years. He's less qualified than Sarah Palin. She was the governor of Alaska briefly. Before that, she was the mayor of Wasilla. This guy, so nobody knew. I'm going to get to his unfavorability ratings just to show you how hated he is. And by the way, I've been painting faces all day because I'm in a rage. And so I'm obligated to tell you that I've been painting faces. This is not what J.D. Vance looks like. It's what he sees in the mirror. He hates himself, and he projects that on to the American people. So nobody knew who J.D. Vance was, except for a few million Americans who watch Sunday morning talk shows. He was relatively unknown before Donald Trump tapped him as the running mate in July. Before the convention started, just when J.D. Vance was announced, Americans already didn't like him. When he came on the scene, the Monday that he was announced before the convention started, he was already 3% underwater. And the more America got to know J.D. Vance, the less they liked him. They hated him. The more he opened his mouth, the more the American people began to hate him. While Kamala Harris's favorability rating was skyrocketing, 18 points into the air, the more American voters got to know who Kamala Harris is, the higher her favorability rating shot up. J.D. Vance, at the same time, was dropping down to where he is this morning, more than 11 points underwater. This is absolutely horrible. You cannot win elections with both the top of the ticket and the bottom of the ticket completely underwater, while the people you're running against have a vice president who's 5% above water, and Kamala Harris just shot up 18% and is about to be above water. You cannot win an election like that. It's impossible. So it is close. It's close. But J.D. Vance is even more disliked than Donald Trump. And Trump wants that. And I'm not inventing things here. I know for a fact, you all know this. Come on. You all know that Trump wants Vance to be more disliked than Trump is. For what? 2, maybe 3 reasons? The first is obvious. Trump's ego could never handle a running mate who was the Republican analog to Coach Walz. Kamala Harris sees the enthusiasm, the love for Coach Walz. He's more liked than she is, but she's confident enough in herself to think, great, more votes for me. But Trump has always surrounded himself with people who aren't threats. That's how he runs his businesses. And that's why he's filed for bankruptcy at least 6 times. Look who's running those businesses, his idiot kids. Or he'll hire somebody like this guy, Stephen Chung, his press spokesman. I'm going to keep this picture of Stephen Chung up while I remind you of all the male Trump White House staffers with arrest records, many of whom have been charged with violence towards women. I did an entire show earlier this year highlighting all these Trump staffers who have had problems with women, accused of physically abusing women. Corey Lewandowski, Max Miller, who's now a congressman from Ohio. I'll be talking about him later. Boris Epshteyn, Brad Parscale, Rob Porter. It goes on and on and on. These top Trump aides, all accused of assaulting women. Some accused, some arrested. Donald Trump likes to be around men like this because, as an adjudicated rapist, Donald Trump sees them as kindred spirits. Plus, they don't make him feel morally or intellectually inferior. You cannot get into Donald Trump's orbit unless you're dirty. It's like all those cops on the take in Serpico. Remember, Al Pacino wouldn't take the bribe, and the other cop said, just come on, take the bribe, donate it to charity, but do something illegal. Take the bribe so we can trust you. That's the mind of a criminal. Donald Trump has to be around dishonest people. Now, I want to be very careful here because I have a picture of Stephen Chung. This is Donald Trump's press spokesman, and I have not been painting faces today of him. I want to just make sure that you understand there is absolutely no evidence of press spokesperson Stephen Chung ever assaulting a woman, because there's absolutely no evidence that he has ever gotten close to one. This is Trump's official campaign spokesperson. Yeah, let's call him a person. He is literally the face of the Trump campaign. So, Trump was never going to pick that face is painted. I think. Let me look. That's J.D. Vance. Yes, I was in a bad mood when I did this. I'm sorry, J.D., but you made me angry. And this is how I work out my hostility. Trump was never going to pick a running mate. I could just look at that all day. Trump was never going to pick a running mate who made him feel uncomfortable. J.D. Vance has had no run-ins with the law. But his language, his lies, his attitude towards women, things he says about unmarried women, things he says about childless women, things he says about gay people, transgender people, and of course immigrants, all those things make him as detestable, if not more so, than Donald Trump. And yes, you can be even more detestable than Donald Trump. So he's no threat to Donald Trump's fragile male ego. Trump is never going to have to worry about voters liking J.D. Vance more than Donald Trump. Trump never has to worry that the J.D. Vance rallies end up drawing bigger crowds than Trump rallies. You would think something like that shouldn't bother a man, but Trump is not a man. He's an adjudicated rapist. Okay, so that's another reason Trump picked J.D. Vance. And I said there were three. There's a third reason. I forgot one. Trump needs someone to blame after he loses. When Trump loses, and he's going to lose, he can now say it's all because of J.D. Vance. He's going to tell people, I should have replaced him right after Biden stepped aside, but I didn't want to hurt the guy's feelings. But I got to tell you, he's a zero. He's a zero. Okay. The other reason, and this is incredible. This is absolutely incredible. The other reason Donald Trump picked J.D. Vance is even more insane. And I mentioned this 2 months ago before he picked J.D. Vance. I mentioned this when I heard Donald Trump Jr. hint about this on his podcast. And yes, I listened to Donald Trump Jr.'s podcast. By the way, I should mention that his fiancée, Kimberly Gargoyle, is doing his hair and makeup these days, and I think he looks fabulous. That's a good look for Don Jr. He and Kimberly Gargoyle are starting to look like each other. Anyway, okay, so how did Donald Trump end up with J.D. Vance? 2 months ago, the Trump campaign was absolutely convinced they were going to beat Joe Biden. They never imagined he would step aside because somebody would give up power. You remember January 6th? Donald Trump can't fathom anybody giving up power. And he figured he was going to beat Biden, especially after that debate. How quickly we forget how Democrats were reeling after the debate. Trump and his people, delusional, insane, They were convinced that Trump was heading back into the Oval Office. And so Don Jr., on his podcast, began planning for the third impeachment. I'm not making this up. This is before J.D. Vance. Don Jr., during an unguarded moment on his podcast, while Biden was still the nominee and up against the ropes, Don Jr. said, I've been meeting with my father and warning him that the deep, dark state will be coming for him the same way they came for him the last time. And what my father needs, and I told him this, is impeachment insurance. Don Jr. said to his father, you got to pick a running mate that's even more MAGA than you are. Again, this was before the convention, before J.D. Vance. Jr. said to his dad, you can't do what everyone expects you to do, picking a paleo-conservative as a running mate, a traditional Republican who brings old guard Republicans back into the fold. Don Jr. said, forget that. You have a running mate, a vice president like that, that only gives the people who hate you more reason to turn their backs on you, and you'll get impeached because they'll think the replacement is better. If you pick Nikki Haley, if you pick Marco Rubio, people will go, even Republicans will say, let's impeach Trump and replace him with Rubio or Nikki Haley, okay? That was what Donald Trump Jr. said on his podcast weeks before the convention when Joe Biden was still the candidate and they thought Donald Trump was going to win. Tucker Carlson, I'm not done with this. Tucker Carlson, according to reporting of the New York Times, this was reporting in the New York Times right after J.D. Vance was picked. According to the New York Times, Tucker Carlson also joined Don Jr. in pushing for J.D. Vance. But Tucker Carlson took it to the next level, telling Trump that Vance will give you impeachment insurance, but he will also give you assassination insurance. This is in the New York Times. I think it was Maggie Haberman. Tucker Carlson, who Donald Trump listened to, told Donald Trump that the deep, dark state would assassinate you if they thought you could be replaced by Marco Rubio or Nikki Haley. So remember the timing on this. Trump was shot on the Saturday before the convention. He picked J.D. Vance as his running mate the following Monday when he was talking to Tucker Carlson, who brought up assassination insurance. So the rap against Trump is when it comes to making big decisions, advisors want to get to him at the very end of the day because he usually goes with the last thing in his ear. Before he picked J.D. Vance, the last thing in his ear was Don Jr., Tucker Carlson, and an assassin's bullet. So he went with J.D. Vance. And this is a disaster. I'm glad Donald Trump, I really am, survived the assassination attempt. I am. I just don't think this makes him look strong. I know everybody thinks he looks strong. I think it makes his position on the assault weapons ban look incredibly weak and stupid. Thank God he survived, because it would have been for many reasons. This is the mop-up for September 6, 2024. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. And of course, subscribe to my channel. And the best way to help me is by sharing this. Okay? Please share this episode with your friends. I'm hosting a watch party. The debate is September 10th. Doors open at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. We'll watch the debate starting at 9 p.m. Eastern. And then after, I will host a conversation with you, the listeners. No guests, just me talking with the listeners, not talking at the listeners, actually listening to the listeners. As I do that, we'll be recording an audio version of my podcast. This is not for YouTube. It's a private meetup on Zoom so I can meet my listeners or talk to them again. If you don't have Zoom, there's also a phone number for you to dial in. You'll get it when you sign up. If you would like the link for the watch party, go to, where can you go? Go to shopdavidfeldman.com. You'll see a couple of buttons that take you to the registration, or go to my official website, davidfeldmanshow.com. Or the easiest thing to do, I think, is check the description to this episode, and you'll see the link there. As I mentioned earlier, I'm charging $3 to cover the costs and to keep MAGA trolls out. I was going to charge $2.50, but Zoom no longer allows me. You have to round it up. Okay. I look forward, if you can make it, I look forward to either talking with you again or meeting you, and I will stay till the very end. If you want to talk, I will. If it goes 12 hours, people who have come to these meetings know if I will talk to everybody who shows up. Okay, back to J.D. Vance. Who just accused Coach Walz yesterday of passing legislation in Minnesota that allows children to be kidnapped in order to perform gender reassignment surgery without any permission from their parents. Okay? And this is what Donald Trump said a week ago when he spoke before Moms for Liberty. He said, they're taking kids, kidnapping kids, and forcing them to have gender reassignment surgery without permission from their parents. At an event yesterday in Arizona, J.D. Walz said, quote, Coach Walz, he didn't call him Coach Walz, he said, Walz, as governor of Minnesota, wants the government to steal your children from you if you don't agree with Tim Walz's values. This is not small government. That is disgusting, and he should be ashamed of himself. J.D. Vance should be ashamed of himself. Just to lie with abandon. Who does he think he is, Donald Trump? When asked for proof by the New York Times that the state of Minnesota is kidnapping children and performing gender reassignment surgery, the Trump campaign said, we'll get back to you on this. Sure you will. On the subject of border security, Vance called undocumented workers, quote, the single biggest threat to American workers. Wait. Undocumented workers are the single biggest threat to American workers? Undocumented workers are buying up perfectly good companies and then saddling those perfectly good companies with the debt they acquired in order to purchase those companies. And in order to pay off that debt, they fire all the employees of that company, then raid their pension and liquidate the entire business? Undocumented workers are doing this? I had no idea undocumented workers were private equity managers knee-deep in leveraged buyouts the way J.D. Vance was right up until about 2 years ago when he decided to run for Senate as a man of the people. Private equity. That's who J.D. Vance is. Private equity. Why are newspapers going out of business? Why are all these companies going out of business? Toys R Us, private equity. That's what J.D. Vance did for a living before he ran for Senate. J.D. Vance was campaigning in Arizona all day yesterday. That is a state Biden won in 2020. The national polling averages as of this morning now show Arizona a dead heat, with both Trump and Harris getting 48% of the vote. It's a dead heat, with no humidity at least. Both Kamala Harris and Tim Walz campaigned Thursday throughout the must-win state of Pennsylvania, where as of this morning, the polling averages show Harris now leading Donald Trump by 1 percentage point. Joe Biden was stumping for Harris yesterday in the key battleground state of Wisconsin, where Biden celebrated his Inflation Reduction Act, which he called the most significant climate bill ever to come out of Washington, D.C. That happens to be true. It might be the most significant climate bill in the history of the world. During his speech, where he talked about the billions of dollars invested in clean energy, Biden announced an additional $7.3 billion would be spent on providing clean energy to parts of rural America, including $573 million for La Crosse, Wisconsin, just miles away from where he was speaking. Biden called the Inflation Reduction Act the largest investment in electricity for rural America since 1936, when FDR was president. I believe it was the TVA, right? Wisconsin, along with Michigan and Pennsylvania, comprise the Big Blue Wall. As you know, all Harris must do is win these three, and she gets to 270. As I said earlier, the polling averages now show Harris with a 1-point lead in Pennsylvania, a 2-point lead in Michigan, and now a 3-point lead in Wisconsin. President Biden takes the show to Michigan tomorrow. Harris has reportedly begun her preparations for the big ABC debate next Tuesday night, and I'm inviting you to my watch party, which I'll be hosting on Zoom. We will watch the debate together, and then I will record an audio version of my podcast where I talk with you, the listeners, where I listen to my listeners. There will be no guests. My listeners will be my guests. I'm doing exactly what I did for the June, was it 27th, 28th debate? It was a huge success for me, a horrible night for Joe Biden, but it was great to meet my listeners and share the experience. If you would like to attend Tuesday's debate watch party, the link is in the description of today's episode. I also have the link over at davidfeldmanshow.com and shopdavidfeldman.com. Look for the tab that says debate watch party. Again, I'm charging $3 to cover costs and keep MAGA trolls out. Last time, some of you couldn't get in because we filled up the room. I didn't expect so many people. It was the first time in more than a year that I did something like this on Zoom. I was unprepared. This time, I promise there will be room for everyone because nobody's going to show up. Please join me. Donald Trump spoke before the Economic Club of New York on Thursday, delivering what his campaign billboarded as a major address on government reform to eliminate waste. Trump promised to create a presidential commission on waste and would name billionaire Elon Musk to head it because his $44 billion purchase of Twitter was such a smart application of money and has been so profitable. Even Elon Musk says his $44 billion Twitter purchase was a disaster. It's now worth $19 billion, which means he lost 55% in 1 year. Still better than putting it into Trump's Truth social media stock. The Wall Street Journal writes that Elon Musk borrowed $13 billion to make the purchase of Twitter. The Wall Street Journal calls the decision by banks to lend Musk that money the single worst call since the financial crash of 2008. But let's put Elon Musk in charge of cutting government spending. The Los Angeles Times reports that Musk's companies, this was back in 2015, the Los Angeles Times reported in 2015 that Musk's companies had received close to $5 billion in government subsidies. That was back in 2015. Business Insider reports Musk has received billions more during the past 9 years from the government. But he's going to come in and root out waste. That is the wrong picture of Elon Musk. I wanted Elon Musk surrounded by government waste. Instead, that's Elon Musk getting wasted. That's Elon Musk getting wasted. Remember when people who smoked pot were cool? Now Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, Jimmy Dore, they're the ones who do it in public. My mother was right. Pot does make you stupid. Donald Trump pled not guilty in absentia. That means he wasn't there. Donald Trump pled not guilty in absentia on Thursday to a new set of superseding indictments in special counsel Jack Smith's Washington, D.C. election interference trial. Trump lawyers entered the plea during a 1-hour hearing before Judge Tanya Chutkan, where both sides try to iron out a timetable and when exactly pretrial hearings could resume. The New York Times reports that Judge Chutkan said it would be a waste of time to schedule an actual trial since she would first need permission from the Supreme Court for it to proceed. So, where are we with this, and what are we looking at? Well, first up will be a ruling from Judge Chutkan saying the trial can, in fact, proceed. We still need her decision, however, on whether the new indictments conform to the Supreme Court's July 1st ruling on presidential immunity. Lawyers for the special counsel's office on Thursday told the judge they want that's just wrong. Sorry. Lawyers for the special counsel's office on Thursday told Judge Chutkan they want pretrial hearings to begin immediately, while lawyers representing Trump said those pretrial hearings should be delayed until December after the election. By the way, the election is now fewer than 2 months away. Judge Chutkan told lawyers for Trump that she has no intention of scheduling the pretrial hearings while worrying about the election calendar. She called the election irrelevant. And that was after Trump's attorneys argued that pretrial hearings this close to November 5th could result in prosecutors releasing new evidence that would prove politically embarrassing to their client. Trump's lawyers then warned, Chutkan reminded Trump's lawyers, this trial has been on hold since December of last year, giving them a look that said, rush to judgment? Are you effing kidding me? Lawyers for the special counsel said they are prepared to present a brief by the end of this month, proving that all charges in their new superseding indictments revolve around Trump's unofficial acts as president, things he was doing to either run for re-election or steal the election, not official acts as president. The special counsel's office told the judge their brief would include new evidence, including FBI interviews with witnesses who had not been previously entered during the discovery process, interviews with witnesses that had not been entered into discovery. Lawyers for Donald Trump argued that more parts of the new superseding indictment should be thrown out because Donald Trump's pressure campaign to get Vice President Mike Pence on January 6 not to count electoral votes was an official act as president. Part of the new indictments involve Donald Trump's pressure campaign to tell Mike Pence not to count the votes. Trump's lawyers say that falls under the purview of official acts as president. But in their July 1st ruling on presidential immunity, the court said they weren't certain whether conversations between Trump and Pence in the lead up to and on January 6 were official acts. Now, one of the arguments that they were not official acts is that Mike Pence on January 6 was fulfilling the vice president's role as president of the Senate, which is not an executive branch function. It's a legislative branch function, therefore not within the reach of the president. The New York Times reported yesterday that lawyers for Trump and the government agreed that no matter how Judge Chutkan rules, they would appeal her decision to the Supreme Court. So we're looking at months, years. Some minor fireworks in the courtroom Thursday. Lawyers for Trump also said they intended to get the entire case thrown out based on Judge Eileen Cannon's ruling in the classified documents case, where she tossed out those indictments, claiming the job of special prosecutor violated the appointments clause of the Constitution. Special counsel, did I say special prosecutor? I'm sorry, special counsel. She said the job of special counsel violates the appointments clause of the Constitution. Jack Smith, the special counsel, is, of course, appealing that decision. During yesterday's hearings, Trump's lawyers said they intend to seek a ruling from Judge Tanya Chutkan on whether the special counsel's office was constitutional. Judge Chutkan, according to reporting in the New York Times, said she saw no legitimate argument challenging the constitutionality of the special counsel's office. Judge Chutkan added on Thursday, this is according to Alan Feuer of the New York Times, she added that there is already legal precedent established by the D.C. Circuit courts allowing the Attorney General's office to create a special counsel without an official act of Congress. Trump's lawyer then, according to the New York Times, said Judge Clarence Thomas directed him personally to bring the legal challenge to the special counsel's office. He directed you? Judge Chutkan asked. Trump's lawyer then stumbled and explained he was citing, he said, I'm only citing the same concurrent opinion that Judge Cannon cited, where Judge Thomas merely suggested that the special counsel's office was unconstitutional. So first, Trump's lawyers said he was challenging the special counsel's office on direct orders from Clarence Thomas, and then he said, I mean, his opinion. It's from his opinion. You might remember in Judge Thomas's concurrent opinion on presidential immunity, he speculated that the job of special counsel might violate the appointments clause of the Constitution. That wasn't a ruling. It wasn't a decision. It wasn't even an opinion. It was an observation made by Clarence Thomas, which Judge Eileen Cannon, the Trump appointee overseeing the classified documents trial, it's what she cited as reason enough to toss the entire case out. That decision is now being appealed, and we'll have to wait for the Supreme Court, no doubt, to decide whether Jack Smith's job is in fact legitimate. Well, I thought she would wait until October, but former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who served on the January 6th committee, has officially endorsed Kamala Harris for president. Speaking to students at Duke University, Cheney said she doesn't have the luxury to say, I'm not voting for Trump, and then leave it at that. Liz Cheney said to guarantee that Trump never steps foot inside the Oval Office, it's necessary for her to vote for Kamala Harris and endorse her. As the New York Times reports, Liz Cheney is a strong supporter of gun rights, is anti-abortion, and deeply conservative. In the 2020 presidential election, Liz Cheney lied and accused Kamala Harris of being to the left of Bernie Sanders. Oh, how I wish. As a congresswoman from Wyoming, Cheney served on the January 6th committee, which doomed her chances of getting reelected back in 2022. She is now, to her credit, planning a series of speeches in key battleground states warning Republicans of what a second term for Donald Trump would look like. Her book about January 6th, Oath and Honor, it just came out, is one of my favorite books about January 6th. I think of all the people who sat on the January 6th committee, she wrote the best book about it, better than a lot of the reporting that has been done on it. It's filled with accusations against both Speaker Mike Johnson and his predecessor, Kevin McCarthy. In effect, she portrays these two men as dangerous, opportunistic, cowardly, and she calls them pathological liars. I really recommend you go to the library and take out Oath and Honor. It is as I said, one of my favorite books about January 6th, and we should be really grateful that she's stepping up and endorsing Kamala Harris. You might remember that Liz Cheney is also the daughter of Dick Cheney, a war criminal responsible for the deaths of at least 1 million innocent Iraqi civilians. He should be behind bars. A nasty divorce battle between first-time Ohio Republican Congressman Max Miller and the daughter of Republican candidate for Ohio Senate Bernie Moreno. It's a divorce that is turning very, very ugly. I've talked about Ohio Republican Congressman Max Miller before. He worked in the Trump White House, where he dated press spokeswoman Stephanie Grisham, who 3 years ago accused Miller in her book of physically assaulting her. Miller immediately filed a defamation lawsuit, which he then quietly dropped. Congressman Miller, he's a first-term congressman, has at least 4 arrests that I know of that either involve drunk driving or physical altercations. 2 years ago, he and the daughter of millionaire car dealership owner Bernie Moreno were married at the Bedminster, New Jersey golf club owned by Donald Trump. Donald Trump, who had become enamored by Miller because of Miller's willingness to spread lies about the 2020 presidential election. That's why Donald Trump campaigned for Miller back in 2022 and helped get Max Miller elected as a congressman from Ohio. Congressman Max Miller and Emily Moreno married exactly 2 years ago, and last month, Max Miller filed for divorce. What happened? They're all about family values. Well, there are now reports that Emily Moreno, now seen with her dad, you can see her right now, she's with her dad, Ohio Senate candidate Bernie Moreno. They're at the July Republican convention. There are reports that she moved out of the couple's house and is refusing to allow Congressman Max Miller to see their 10-month-old daughter. Emily Moreno is reportedly accusing Congressman Max Miller. I hope this isn't true. She's accusing him of drug use. She's also accusing Congressman Max Miller of saying horrible things about her laughably inconsequential father, Bernie Moreno, the Republican candidate for Senate running for Ohio Democrat Sherrod Brown's seat. So, I hope all of this isn't true. I really do. What we're learning is that Emily Moreno, unbeknownst to Congressman Max Miller, shelled out close to $700,000 for a brand new home and moved in there on August 1st. That property seems to have been purchased secretly by Emily's father, Bernie Moreno, who owns a car dealership and thinks that makes him qualified to become a United States senator. I hope none of this is true. Congressman Max Miller, who Stephanie Grisham in her book said physically assaulted her, Congressman Max Miller is allegedly refusing to pay the homeowner association fees for his soon-to-be ex-wife's Washington, D.C. condominium. So I guess when they got married, she had her own condo, and she kept it, and she wants him to pay the homeowner association fees, and he won't do it. And he's also refusing to pay the car insurance on her $140,000 Mercedes she purchased from her father's dealership. The party of family values. Her father made her purchase a $140,000 Mercedes from his dealership, yet he doles out more than $500,000 for a home for her. I wonder, do you think she had to shell out $140,000 to buy a Mercedes? Congressman Max Miller reportedly claims his soon-to-be ex-wife has refused to let him see their 10-month-old child unless he pays for the privilege. In other words, he's got to pay the homeowners association fees and the insurance on a $140,000 Mercedes in order to see his daughter, 10-month-old. I don't believe this, and I hope it's not true. I hate to see a young couple go through this. I just find it hard to believe that a Republican wife, the daughter of car dealership owner Bernie Moreno, and soon-to-be senator from Ohio, I don't believe that she would deprive her young daughter of the valuable bonding time with her dad, Congressman Max Miller, who Stephanie Grisham, in her book, accused of physically assaulting her. I just don't believe this is true. I don't believe that a wife would say, unless you pay my homeowner association fees and you cover the insurance on my $140,000 Mercedes, you can't see our daughter. I don't believe this. I have to believe that good and decent Republicans like them would put the interests of the young child first. I mean, they are Republicans. It's all about the kids. Senate candidate Bernie Moreno, who has been forced to deny allegations that he visited gay dating sites. You can Google that. There have been allegations that he had a dating profile on several gay sites. I don't believe that's true, and he's denied it, and I'm sure it is not true. Bernie Moreno said he is saddened by the dissolution of his daughter's marriage, but said he will not comment any further since it's a private and personal matter. Yes, he wants us to respect his daughter's privacy because that's what the Republicans are all about, respecting a woman's privacy. Yes, just Let her work out, he said, her personal issues on her own. She's a grown woman. Unless, of course, she needs close to $1 million for a new home or a new Mercedes. But yes, let's keep cutting taxes for the wealthy so their darling children can live happy and fulfilling lives. They really seem to. I like this Max Miller, and I like this Emily Moreno. They really seem to have their heads screwed on straight. You can Google everything I say. Just, just to double check. Well, I got to wrap it up. The government runs out of money on October 1st of this year unless Congress somehow passes the 2025 budget. Is this a rerun? October 1st is the beginning of our government's fiscal year, not January 1st, October 1st. Why? Well, I think it might have something to do with the chances of Congress ever getting the budget done on time is zero. So they start the year 3 months early in the hope they finally get a budget finished by January 1st. Kind of like setting your clock 3 hours early so you make it to work on time. A new budget is due October 1st. Budgets, as you know, are made up of 12 separate funding bills, and according to The Hill, so far, Speaker Mike Johnson has only been able to pass 5 out of the 12 appropriations bills, which is still better than what Kevin McCarthy had accomplished last year at this time when they were still hashing out the 2024 federal budget, which finally passed, beginning of March of this year? By December of last year, no appropriations bills had been passed. Look, I know some of you don't like my painting these faces. I have a lot of hostility. This is occupational therapy. This is what I do so I don't put my fist through a wall. If you don't like these paintings, then don't look at what's over my shoulder. But I have to do this because because that makes me happy. That makes me happy. Okay. The budget, most pressing, is the Department of Veterans Affairs. Right? The VA runs out of money on September 20th because passage of the $3 billion PACT Act, providing additional benefits to veterans exposed to toxic chemicals, hasn't been properly funded. More veterans are stepping forward with medical claims than had been anticipated. So the VA runs out of money in about 14 days. Next Tuesday, Congress returns from its much-deserved 6-week vacation, and they have, by my count, 12 working days to pass either a new budget, which is never going to happen, or a continuing resolution, which, as you know, is a stopgap funding bill to keep the government running until these D-bags can finally get around to passing an actual budget. The issue isn't, will they need a continuing resolution? The issue is, what kind of continuing resolution will it be? Some Republicans want the continuing resolution to expire sometime after the election, while others want it to expire after the new year when a new House of Representatives is sworn in, and others want it to expire as far as March, so then President Trump can address the 2025 budget. There is also the issue of raising the debt ceiling. You might remember back in June of last year, President Biden and then Speaker Kevin McCarthy negotiated a deal to raise the debt ceiling in 2023 and not revisit the issue until a new president is sworn in 2025. Come January, there's going to be a debt ceiling crisis. So, Speaker Mike Johnson, remember him? he is twisting himself in knots trying to figure out how to serve Mein Fuhrer. If he expects Trump to win, Johnson probably wants to raise the debt ceiling on Joe Biden's watch. Johnson probably wants Trump to arrive back in the Oval Office with a clean slate, nothing on his desk, no continuing resolution with the 2025 budget still not resolved. Then again, there are hardliners in the Freedom Caucus who basically want to zero out government spending now, which means they are going to start threatening a government shutdown next week. Traditionally, that makes Republicans look bad. Government shutdowns traditionally make Republicans look bad, but when has looking bad ever stopped the Republicans? Trump has signaled he wants a government shutdown because he wants chaos and dysfunction in the lead up to the election, which is why he and Mike Johnson may be planning to attach a bill to the continuing resolution called the SAVE Act that would demand all Americans show proof of citizenship before being allowed to vote. It's already illegal for non-citizens to vote in federal elections. And according to the Brennan Center, the number of non-citizens voting is imperceptible. It's so small. It's like Don Jr.'s IQ. It cannot be measured. But the SAVE Act, attached to a continuing resolution, would serve as a poison pill, making the continuing resolution dead on arrival. The Democrats wouldn't vote for it. The political calculation being a government shutdown starting October 1st could be blamed on the Democrats for refusing to vote in favor of the SAVE Act, which demands proof of citizenship before voting. Okay? So, that would be called a dirty continuing resolution. That's what they call it. That's called a dirty bill. Dirty because there's another bill attached to it. A clean bill would be a continuing resolution that is a straight thumbs up or thumbs down on keeping the government open for a set period of time with spending frozen at the 2024 budget levels. That's a clean bill. It's a mess for Republicans because whatever they do will backfire politically. Trump world seems to be signaling they want a 6-month continuing resolution, which would allow Trump, when he's in the Oval Office, it will allow him to determine the 2025 budget. But there are others in Trump world who don't want him coming into office saddled with last year's business. They want a fresh start, one that allows him to implement Project 2025 on day one and have it all come to fruition a year from now when the budget battle over 2026 takes place. Now, historically, whenever there's a government shutdown, Americans blame Republicans. Whenever there's a threat of a government shutdown, historically, Americans blame Republicans. So we like to think that most voters don't grasp civics, but they do. They understand the pitfalls of divided government, which we have right now. And because Joe Biden still has a bully pulpit, he and Kamala Harris are able to make a convincing case to the American people that Trump is holding the government hostage. And as much as Americans think they hate big government, Biden and Obama before him have done a pretty good job reminding voters who suffers when the government isn't funded. For Trump, the budget negotiations that are about to start are like abortion. No matter which way he turns, he loses. If he pushes for a government shutdown, he satisfies the hardline fiscal hawks in the Freedom Caucus, but then he jeopardizes the political future of Republican members of Congress who represent extremely moderate districts, purple districts they're called, that Joe Biden carried in 2020. I'm going to wrap it up. How am I doing? Okay. There are two types of Republicans in the House right now. The ones who represent deep red districts who are free to pursue hard right Republican policies. Then there are the 19 Republicans representing districts that Joe Biden won in 2020. Now remember, Democrats only need to flip a handful of those seats in November to win control of the House, and they are going to win control of the House. The problem is keeping control of the Senate. Have you gone to johntester.com and donated and offered to do volunteer work? So, while Mike Johnson tries to figure out how to please Donald Trump, how to appease Donald Trump's terrible political instincts that will further jeopardize Republicans holding onto the House and recapturing the Senate, the committee chairs in the House are ramping up their attacks on Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and Coach Waltz. The Republican-controlled House Education and Workforce Committee issued subpoenas looking into the role Minnesota Governor Tim Walz played in a COVID-era-related scandal where federal dollars earmarked for free school meals ended up missing. Walz, as governor, alerted the federal government to the misappropriation of funds. He discovered it first and reported it, but Republicans will try to blame it on him. House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan is holding field hearings in California entitled The Biden-Harris Border Crisis, California Perspectives. That's literally what it's called, even though border crossings are now at an all-time low. Next Tuesday, Jim Jordan has ordered one of his subcommittees to hold hearings entitled The Biden-Harris Border Crisis, Non-Citizen Voting, even though there is no evidence of non-citizens voting. Jim Jordan has also scheduled hearings entitled The Consequences of Soft-on-Crime Policies, even though the crime and murder rate in America, especially in blue cities, has plummeted since Joe Biden took office. Jim Comer, the head of the House Oversight Committee, will be holding hearings looking into I'm not making this up. Jim Comer, the head of the House Oversight Committee, will be holding hearings looking into the possibilities that Coach Waltz is a Manchurian candidate groomed by the Chinese Communist Party to spread their anti-capitalist ideology throughout the upper reaches of the American government. I am not making this up. I played you the clip last week of Comer accusing Waltz of grooming young students to become communist sympathizers. And, believe it or not, Marjorie Taylor Greene may introduce a resolution on impeaching President Biden. And depending on how she introduces that resolution, she could force an actual vote. She forced an actual vote on impeaching Alejandro Mayorkas. It failed. Then somebody else introduced an impeachment vote on Mayorkas, and it passed. And they did impeach Alejandro Mayorkas, Alejandro Mayorkas, head of Homeland Security, because of the border, which is now, which isn't a crisis, and border crossings are now at an all-time low. As I said, there are 19 Republicans serving in districts that Joe Biden won in 2020. They will never vote to impeach Joe Biden. It's not going to pass. Joe Biden is not going to get impeached. But Donald Trump wants Joe Biden to be impeached. He's saying, what's the point of having control of the House of Representatives if we can't impeach Joe Biden? As Trump continues to spiral, both in the polls and mentally, we will see him in the lead up to the election pressuring the House to impeach Joe Biden. It is driving Trump even crazier than he already is, that Trump was impeached twice, and we're coming up on 2 years of Republicans controlling the House, and they haven't had the decency to at least impeach Joe Biden once. The number one reason Trump abandoned Kevin McCarthy and didn't save him when the vote was taken to vacate the chair is Trump told McCarthy, you were Speaker for at least 6 months. You had plenty of time to impeach Joe Biden. And in failing to do so, you have proved yourself disloyal. An impeachment of Joe Biden will backfire politically for the Republicans. Doesn't matter. Donald Trump is Hitler in the bunker. Remember Donald Trump eating a cheeseburger for 3 hours and watching January 6th? That's Hitler in the bunker. Trump makes decisions that will destroy everyone and everything around him. He doesn't care as long as it feeds his insatiable ego, which is why many Republicans now are privately whispering they not only hope that Kamala Harris wins, they're also secretly praying for a total repudiation at the ballot box of Donald Trump. There are Republicans serving in the Senate and even the House who privately say they want a landslide. They want to lose the House because they can't govern with Trump in charge. The House, under GOP control, this House, is the single most ineffective House of Representatives in American history. Look that up. Fewer bills have been passed by this House of Representatives than any House of Representatives in American history. And they secretly blame Donald Trump. He has control over the Republican caucus in the House. A lot of Republicans quietly want to be done with Trump. They want his hold over the House Republican caucus and the entire Republican Party to be severed. And they're secretly saying that can only happen if he is deemed politically radioactive on November 6th. In order to save the party, they're saying it must first be destroyed and then rebuilt, not in Donald Trump's image. They're never going to say this out loud. It's what they're whispering. So I say, let's help them out. Let's save the Republican Party. Let's give them what they secretly want. Let's make sure Trump and this homunculus J.D. Vance suffer the worst defeat in modern political history. Get to work. Get to work, get to work, get to work. Get to work for Jon Tester in Montana. And let's make sure Kamala Harris comes into office with a tsunami where she gets the House and the Senate. We keep the Senate. But you got to get to work. Don't wait for the party to call you. You call the party. JohnTester.com. Phone bank for JohnTester.com. Send him money. Go to Montana and knock on doors. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you to Bob in the chat room who keeps the conversation civil. If you would like a free transcript of today's episode, go to shopdavidfeldman.com. The transcripts are free, thanks to my listeners who buy garbage over at shopdavidfeldman.com, like the coffee mug and the T-shirt that say "Still a Democrat." It's a happy heart, all bruised and battered. There's the Made in Los Estados Unidos coffee mug. There's the Albert Einstein coffee mug where he says, "I'm surrounded by idiots." You know this map. It's the worst case scenario map. It shows you how Harris is going to win with just 270 electoral votes because she just needs to carry Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I put it on a mug. You can buy it, the worst case scenario mug, over at shopdavidfeldman.com. And if you want to disabuse me of the notion that I've cultivated a sophisticated audience, go buy my number 1 bestseller. It's a chef's apron that says, "I hope you're in the mood for diarrhea." I have prototypes of some Halloween items. If you go to shopdavidfeldman.com, I'm playing with some ideas for Halloween. They may be too grotesque. I can't show them on the show. If you like today's episode, please hit the like button and share it, please. Everything the garbage at Shop David Feldman, if you really want to support this show, share it. That's the best way to help. And leave comments. I read all your comments. I know some of you don't like me painting faces. It's what I have done all my life, drawing mustaches on celebrities and just, defacing photographs, magazine pictures of beautiful people. Now I'm doing it to ugly people. I'm done going through People magazine's sexiest men alive and with my pen and making them look ugly. Now I'm taking Republicans who are already ugly and making them even uglier. And I know you don't like it, but this is the only thing that brings me joy. Doing that to J.D. Waltz's face. I know people don't want me doing that to Liz Cheney, but her father is responsible for 1 million dead Iraqi civilians. And the watch party. We're doing a watch party September 10th. The link is actually in the description of today's show. Okay. Thank you very much. If I didn't have you listening, I would put my fist through a wall. So thank you. Bye. Tomorrow, I didn't do a show last night. I was exhausted, but I'm keeping 2:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time seems to be, I'm going to do another show tomorrow at 2:30 a.m. Eastern. I'm almost promising that. Thank you.